And so Coryell gets to the Cardinals, and he's already broken all kinds of ground with his San Diego State passing games. He's torn up the college level, in those smaller Division I teams that they played against in those days. And he sees two defensive linemen playing a yard and a half off of the ball. And as I quoted Dan Dierdorf saying, Dan said, Coryell says, well, if they're a couple yards off the ball, they can't get to the quarterback. So we'll just start throwing the ball. So they were throwing on first down, which was very unusual in those days. And here's my quote from Dierdorf. He said he was talking about the flex defense. He says, I guarantee you. Actually, he was talking about, he says, when Coryell got to the NFL, he says, I guarantee you Coryell caused Landry and Allen. Remember I said the Redskins and George Allen were also dominant back then. I guarantee you Coryell caused Landry and Allen sleepless nights when we played them. Dallas had Landry's flex defense. We ran them out of it. Landry had to quit playing the flex against us. And then he was talking about, that's back when Too Tall Jones was the defensive end for the Cowboys, 6'9", 271. And he said when they came out of the huddle, they'd have a pass play called, and he'd see Too Tall Jones, a yard and a half off the ball. My quote from Dan was, when I'd walk to the line and saw Too Tall in that squatty frog stance, a yard and a half off the ball, he couldn't beat me to the quarterback if I was standing backward.
Huh.
Well, it shows you how far Coryell was just ahead of the NFL. Here's Landry, so famous for that flex defense, and they couldn't even use it against the Cardinals. The Cardinals were beating them. They won the division title in 74 and 75, back to back.
Yeah, that's an incredible accomplishment, especially knowing he did it for the Cardinals organization for sure.
Yeah, and then that was the other point I made with Dan and Dan Dierdorf in the story. Coryell never had resources. He at San Diego State, he relied on junior college transfers.
Right.
It wasn't, like I said, a bigger Division I school like it is now. And, of course, Cardinals, Bill Bidwell was always one of the cheapest owners in the NFL. And here he is beating the Dallas Cowboys, the model franchise in the NFL, model of stability and, America's team. And then George Allen, when he finally got fired by Edward Bennett Williams as the Redskins coach, the Redskins owner, Edward Bennett Williams, said that he gave George Allen an unlimited budget and he exceeded it. So Coryell didn't have anywhere near the resources of of his rivals, and he was beating them.
Well, kind of reminds me a little bit of the Tampa Bay Rays. They don't have any money to spend, but they find a way to win.
Yeah. A lot of that is real good scouting, though. This was, in Coryell's case, it was, the Rays have that great minor league program. Coryell's case is he was just ahead of the league. Nobody knew how to handle his passing game. Let's see, what else can I tell you about what Dierdorf had to say? He talked about the middle screen, the screen option. Nobody was doing this in the NFL at the time. What they would do is their running back would drift off to the left or the right, like a typical screen pass, and the lineman would pull with them. But Coryell would also have the tight end run a few yards downfield and run a hook pattern. Well, it was only an option to throw to the tight end as long as the lineman didn't run downfield. Otherwise, they'd get flagged. So Coryell would tell the lineman, do not run upfield until you hear the running back yell, go, after he caught the ball. And so that way they stayed back if Jim Hart instead went to the tight end. And Dierdorf said they just killed teams with that play.
Right.
Nobody knew how to handle it.
Anything else stand out in that story that you want to tell?
Yeah, you mentioned Jim Hart. one of the things I did was I put together a list of both players of the Cardinals and the Chargers, that are famous names. Deerdorfer's in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. Dan Fouts is in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. Charlie Joyner, receiver with the Chargers. Kellen Winslow, tight end with the Chargers. Those guys are in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. But a lot of both Cardinals and Chargers, they never made a Pro Bowl until they played for Coryell. And a perfect example of that is, you mentioned Jim Hart. People know that name because he had so much success throwing the ball with the Cardinals. But he had actually been benched in the 72 season by the old coach, Bob Holloway. And then Coryell came in 73, and Joe Gibbs was his quarterback coach. And Deerdorf said that Jim Hart had a cannon for an arm. You could throw it like Terry Bradshaw. So they couldn't believe that Jim Hart wasn't the quarterback. And that was one of the first things they did, is they made him their starting quarterback. And so Jim Hart, who never made a Pro, he'd been in the league since 66, and he'd been a starter before, but he'd never made a Pro Bowl until under Coryell, and then he made it 4 straight years, 74, 75, 76, 77. And you can go right down the list of Cardinal players, and it's true for them, too. In fact, Deerdorf had never made a Hall of Fame until Coryell got there. Some guy named Tom Banks. You ever hear him?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. He made his Hall of Fames after Coryell got there. Hadn't been in one. Terry Metcalf, of course, was drafted by the Cardinals when Coryell got there, and he made 3 Pro Bowls. Jim Otis, kind of a slow fullback.
Right.
He made 1 Pro Bowl, 1975. Coryell's the year they won their second title. So. And then I can go down the Chargers list, same thing. Dan Fouts had never made a Pro Bowl until Coryell took over the Chargers.
Interesting stuff.
So, yeah, people can read that. I haven't linked both my Dan Fouts story from last year and this list of Pro Bowlers. It's on the front page of Shanahan Report. Just look for the picture of Don Coryell and Dan Deerdorf together.
Okay. All right. Do you have anything else you want to talk about? You talked about Duke beating Miami last night. How about give us a summary about what happened there?
Yeah, last night I was at the Duke-Miami game, and people were starting to wonder about Duke because they'd lost 2 in a row. They'd lost on the road to Clemson, and then they lost at home to Louisville. Now, Louisville has been a top 10 or top 25 team all year, and they've been in and out of the top 10. They were at number 1 at one point. So Louisville is actually a very good team, and they're getting better. The main reason for that is they have a freshman point guard who's at this point is coming off the bench because he had missed most of the summer and then the summer as far as conditioning and, preparing for the season, and then the start of the season with a shoulder injury. So now he's healthy, and he comes out. He puts up 17. He's 6'5", 210. So he's a big kid, but he can play point guard. And he gave Trey Jones, who's a great defensive guard for Duke, a lot of trouble. He had 70 points in the first half. So that the Louisville game really wasn't that much to be concerned about because they're a very good team. But Coach K was getting a little worried that in both the Clemson game and the Louisville game, older players for Clemson and Louisville were making more and better plays down the stretch than Duke, which is a very young team. And so that has been his focus is the Duke grown up fast between now and March. And against Miami, it was one of those nights where they were able to put everything together. One of the reasons was Vernon Carey, their 6'10", 270-pound center. He's been having such a good year that now teams are starting to double and even triple team him under the post. Now against Louisville, Duke couldn't hit the three-pointer. They just had a bad night hitting the three-pointer. Against Miami, they were on fire, and so then that was part of the reason they blew out Miami 89-59.
So at this point in time, Tom, as we wind down toward the stretch run, How do you like Duke going forward? Do you think they're finally rounding up into the team that could go very deep into March Madness?
Oh yeah, absolutely. They've got the talent. They're a little bit. They don't really have another big man other than Vernon Carey, and he's only a freshman, so he's still kind of learning his way. So when he gets double and triple team, he didn't handle it against Louisville. He did handle it against Miami, where he was kicking the ball out. He had 3 assists, but they just have so many good players. Trey Jones is a great point guard, great defensive point guard. Duke is definitely going to be a contender for the Final Four.
Okay, so now that we're talking Final Four, and I realize, Tom, that we're still, into January. We haven't even hit the Super Bowl yet. But I like to have little spots where we can gauge it. If you had to pick a Final Four tomorrow, Tom Shanahan, who would be your Final Four?
Let's see. I haven't watched a lot of Baylor, but they're up to number 1, and they beat Kansas. So I'll say Baylor. I'll say Duke. And Michigan State, I think, is still very similar to Duke in that they're a younger team than people realize. So they're still kind of putting all the pieces together. But both Duke and Michigan State, as well as they're playing now, still have a high ceiling. So those two. Let's see, fourth one. Kansas, I don't think can make it with. They're going to have some suspensions, and they're going to be without players. And I just think the season's going to go south on Kansas. Heck, if this David Johnson, the point guard at Louisville that I was talking about earlier, if he keeps playing like he has been, Louisville is a very veteran team. They got a graduate transfer, and then they got a couple of redshirt seniors among their players. And then Jordan Nwora, he was a third-team All-ACC player, and he came back this year. So Louisville has a lot more talent. It's kind of amazing how fast Chris Mack has not only got that team winning, but changed the image of the whole program.
All right, Tom, you talked about Kansas for a moment, and now I want to talk about that for a moment, if I may, all right? I didn't watch it, but I heard about it. Kansas and Kansas State had a brawl. What do you know about that situation? And before you answer that question, I remember many years ago, I think it was in the 1988, where the Kansas and Kansas State actually played in the regional finals at the Pontiac Silverdome. So it was neat to see an in-state matchup over in my own state. So just a little irony there, but so you obviously know that the basketball can get pretty hot in the state of Kansas. But what do you know about what transpired last night between Kansas and Kansas State?
Yeah, I didn't see it because I was at the Duke game, but I saw some of the highlights.
Right.
Basically, Kansas was, dribbling out the clock. They won the game by 21 points, I think. And nowadays teams know to just let them dribble out the clock, and then the Kansas State guy decides to make a play to steal the ball, and the Kansas guy gets it back, and then he goes in for a dunk.
Right.
As time's going out, and it was D'Souza, who's already caused all kinds of trouble at Kansas for in the Shoegate deals, the FBI investigation. So he not only goes in and dunks, but he taunts the Kansas State guy, stands over him, and so then the fight breaks out from there. And there were some punches thrown, but it could have been a lot worse. I guess if a lot of people hadn't jumped in there and broken the fight up as quickly as they did. But, I don't know why players have to, what they're doing? They're copying what they see on TV from the pro athletes. They can't just play the game. They've got to taunt their opponent. And then people get excited about it. You see that in the NFL with all the shenanigans in the end zone. And people saying, oh, let them celebrate, let them have fun. I hate all that. And one of the reasons I hate it is because high school and youth league kids watch that, and they think it's acceptable. And it's a big headache for high school and youth league coaches to try to teach kids you can't do stuff like that. You have to show some sportsmanship.
Yeah, I would definitely think you do, but unfortunately,